Sir Mo Farah has said he was trafficked into the UK and forced to work as a domestic servant. He's made this revelation in a documentary put together by the BBC and Red Bull Studios. He was flown to this country from Somalia when he was 9 years old by a woman he'd never met. When he arrived, he was made to look after another family's children. In the documentary, Sir Mo said he was told not to say anything if he ever wanted to see his family again. One of his teachers contacted social services and he ended up being fostered by another Somali family. He then began to make a name for himself as a runner, going on to be one of Team GB's most celebrated athletes. To talk about this story in a bit more detail, I'm really pleased to say I'm joined by Becky Murray, who is the founder of One by One, a charity that is rescuing victims of human trafficking across Africa. Becky, first of all, thank you very much for joining us on the programme today.
Pleasure. Lovely to be here.
How did you feel reading about Sir Mo's story this morning?
It was tragically all too familiar. So many times the children that we've been able to help and reach have got very similar stories where they were, gone with the hopes of a new life, whether that be in education or a job offer in the city. And so many times children go, and whether it be out of a background of poverty or background of war, there's many different things that can lead a child to be incredibly vulnerable. And traffickers are very quick to act on this because then they can take the child. And oftentimes, especially if the child's come from an orphaned background, there's not necessarily even anyone searching for that child.
He said he wanted to share his story as part of this documentary because he wanted to raise awareness of modern slavery and trafficking. How vital are voices like his when you're trying to raise these issues in the public sphere?
Oh, phenomenal. So firstly, I just want to take my hat off to him because it's incredibly brave to speak out. He could have been nervous that he would lose his citizenship or all kinds of things. And because of the status he has, to use his voice is phenomenal because actually there's thousands, millions of lives, men, women and children who are finding themselves in the exact same situation that Mo found himself in. And one of the reports I read said that Mo came over here and all of a sudden, as soon as he arrived here, the piece of paper with all the contact details of any family members was taken from him, ripped up and put in a bin. And he says at that moment, he knew he was in trouble. And so oftentimes children find themselves in the most incredibly vulnerable situations and they end up being exploited. And the same happens where all their relatives, all their friends, they're cut off from everybody in order to silence them. And then fear kicks in because they're told, well, if you don't do the work, you won't eat. Or if you speak up and tell someone about this, then, we'll make sure your family never see you again. And all kinds of horrific situations happen. And so the fact that Mo's put a voice to this is incredibly important and will inspire hope for any children who are listening. Maybe it's on the radio in the background when they're working in a home, and suddenly it inspires hope that, what, if he can get free from this, then so can I.
I wonder if, Becky, you can tell us about some of the children that you've worked with. What kind of things have they experienced?
Yeah, so for me, it all started just over 7 years ago now, where I had two mums approach me. So we were running our One by One base in Kenya, where we run a primary school and a secondary school and residential care for vulnerable kids that had either been orphaned or abandoned. And I was on the base, our site, in 2015. And when I walked through our school gates into the village, I had two mums approach me on 2 separate days, both asking for help because their children were missing and they didn't know why. One little girl had gone for 5 months and no one knew where she was. So we started to do some research and found out human trafficking was happening in our village in Bumalabi, Kenya. And so I started to do some research of when are the girls targeted, how are they targeted, and found out that many times girls are missing a week of school every month simply because they don't have access to sanitary products. And so there are some phenomenal organisations that are helping girls that have already been trafficked. But I thought, my background's nursing, and in nursing, everyone tells you prevention is better than cure. And I thought, why can't we apply that principle to human trafficking? Why can't we get to the girls before the traffickers? And so one by one over the last 7 years has been going into primary schools, reaching very young children, giving girls reusable sanitary products that they can stay in school, but then also delivering educational programs that tell the children the whens and the hows that they're likely to be targeted. So we do lots of different dramas and lots of different awareness raising of tactics that traffickers are likely to use to try and entice them. And as a result of that, many girls have then come forward with their stories. Anything from one girl in Brazil whose own father began to sell her body for sex in the village, to then other children who it was maybe a brother or an uncle or a teacher. And some children have been relocated to different villages in different areas. And again, it just silences the child.
Becky, I wonder if I could just ask you, as a Christian, when you come across stories like that, what kind of an impact does it have on your faith?
So obviously a lot of what we're dealing with is the impacts of people who've made horrific choices, in whether that be the traffickers or brickmasters. We do a lot of work in Pakistan where children are born into bonded labour, and so we've been working to rescue them out of brick factories as well. And a lot of the time people make vile decisions, and so whether it be dealing with a brickmaster or dealing with, you know, the child on the ground who hasn't made any wrong decisions, they're just trying to survive. But in terms of my faith, that motivates me to move on and do more, because, you know what, at one point we were all slaves to sin, and I'm so thankful that God firstly rescued this life. But then it motivates me more and more that in our day and age, we shouldn't be living in a world where slavery is even existing. And yet, tragically, slavery is bigger today than it has ever been. There's over 40.3 million people trapped in slavery. And commonly, many of those are women and children. And so it drives me all the more to, come on, let's see this giant come down. Let's see Goliath, the giant of slavery, be once and for all abolished in our day and age.